Good morning, everyone. Firstly, delighted to be here. It's an honor and a pleasure. This panel is going to really focus on a question, and a question that I think is really critical. Typically, the question would, in most of these panels, be, what is the future of AI? I don't want to focus on that question. I want to focus on an alternative question of what is the future of being human? Because I think the major crisis that we're in the middle of is a crisis of what it means to be human in an age of automation. In an age where the value of labor is diminishing relative to the value of assets. And the crisis that I think we're in the middle of and that we're emerging into is, what does the value of being human look like? And this question is a question that we faced historically in the Industrial Revolution, when we reimagined humans to be machines. And we built schools to make humans more machines. And now the crisis is of what does it mean to be human in an age where machines will almost certainly outpass our contribution as labor. And I think this is a profound question because it will challenge almost all of our investment theories in health, education, and other capabilities. What we have on the panel is, I think, two extraordinary leaders who are exploring this question in the present, but also with a commitment over the next 10 years. Any society which can't address the question of being human, I think, will face a systemic crisis of how it organizes itself and its social contract. It's in this context that I really want to open up the conversation to our panelists, who I think are actually really not only thinking about this, but thinking about this very deeply. So first I'm going to come to you, Brendan, with Inside Out and what you're doing. Can I ask you, if you look 10 years forward, what do you think you'll be doing relative to this problem space? Because you've been doing some extraordinary work in terms of positioning the present to the future. I want you to come back from 10 years back to the present. What do you think you'll be doing to address this kind of fundamental problem space?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. My name is Brendan Doherty, and as Indy mentioned, I'm with Inside Out, which I'll share a little bit more about. You know, the world is changing so rapidly right now, it's almost incredibly risky to predict 10 years ahead. I will say there's one prediction that I have a pretty high confidence in, and I'm willing to say a bold confidence in, which is that in 2036, my daughter Willow will be a teenager, and so one prediction is it's going to be a terrifying year, and it'll be one where I practice humility on a daily basis. I also think in some ways she'll probably be able to better predict the future than even I could in 10 years, which I think will be a special moment too. You know, people ask me often, are you an optimist about the future or are you a pessimist? And my answer is always yes. You know, it's both. The future is not the given, the future is how we shape it and how we form it. And so at Inside Out, that's a big approach that we take, which is we say, what if you could build businesses for the environment of the future? We're a global holding company. We invest in and build businesses that are at environmental tipping points. Our founder is a woman named Susie Amos Cameron. She is a farm girl from Oklahoma in the US who went on to act in 20 different films, ultimately in a film called Titanic. In Titanic, she and the director, James Cameron, fell in love. They've been married about 25 years, have a big family, live in New Zealand. She has been a lifelong environmentalist and investor. And at our company, we invest in these futures around the environment. So a few predictions. One is that I think sustainable luxury will become what organic food is to food today. It will be, sustainable fashion will be the organic version of food that'll be much more widely adopted. The second is I hope that we as a company will be pioneering physical AI. I can share a little bit more about that if we get to it. And then the third is that I think we will maintain our philosophy as an organization, which is Inside Out is really about this idea of what we put on the inside matters just as much as what we put on the outside of our bodies. which matters just as much as how we architect the world around us. And that interplay of human and planetary health is really where we sit. And I predict that we'll continue to focus on these ideas of adjacent possibilities, which is something that you and I talked about when we first met, this idea that with each new opportunity, we find 3 more, and we want to be at the forefront of pursuing that.
Amazing. Thank you. And Dr. Alaa, you're moving capital towards this idea of, I think you are a medical doctor, you've been looking at this problem. Where do you see yourself going? And one thing I want to add is that I think we often talk about the future of being human, and I think in that future is also a new future of what it means to be a machine, right? So the paradigm is a different theory of machines that recognize a new form of agentic futures and other things. Could you give me a glimpse as to what you see over the next 10 years? And 10 years backwards, what will you be investing into?
So to answer your question, I think we're in the same boat right now. I think being human is being messy. And that might be clouded by the fact that I have a 4- and a 5-year-old, but I think life is inherently messy. The future is messy. And I think there are elements that we won't ever be able to replace. One of them is to have full agency, to be able to look at things with a lens of compassion, to be able to ask the challenging questions, to be able to exist in contradiction, to recognize that sometimes there isn't an answer to the questions that you really have. And I don't see that changing in the next 10 years. I think if anything, we're going to have more questions, not less. I think to your point, we're going to have, every time we unlock a possibility, with that comes 1,000 questions of what does this look like? Can it be harmful? Can it be helpful? What could mitigate it? How do we create the right policies that really enable it in the most effective way? And so I think the future in 10 years is the future that we have the courage, capacity, and frankly, the accountability to build. It is not going for the low-hanging fruit. It's saying we're actually going to build in human policies into AI as it exists today. We are going to talk about accountability. We're going to talk about regulation. We don't have the best history, by the way, of being able to do that as we build new innovations and technology. So that is it's a long ask for us. And then I will say, I think in 10 years, the world, for me at least, will look very similar to what it does today. And that is that I will still be as fully committed to ensuring that children can survive preventable causes of death, that women have full access to economic opportunity, to agency, and that everyone has the opportunity to live a dignified life. I actually think that's going to be more challenging in the next 10 years as we look at the inequities that innovation can bring, and so that's where I think capital really needs to come in. I think for a very long time we've operated under the assumption that that those who are closest to the problems are not necessarily the ones that need to be funded for the solutions. And I think our work is about really how do you create the right kind of capital stack? How do you bring different forms of capital, philanthropic, sovereign, development finance institutions, private sector? How do you ensure that a lot of the capital that you need is actually reduced because you can integrate some of these solutions in national budgets, you can appropriate effectively, you can create policies that make them much more compelling, attractive, and low cost. But how do we ensure those who are going to be most impacted by the problems, be it climate, be it health inequities, how do we ensure that they have access to capital to really be the ones to create the solutions and to invest and reinvest in those solutions rather than needing perpetual additional external income. So that's really the focus of our work. And I think for the past 15 years, I've had the privilege. I've advised the UN Security Council. I've co-written and co-supported and am a UN SDG advocate. I'm a UN High-Level Commissioner on Health, Employment, and Economic Growth. And I have to say, across all of it, one thing I would emphasize is the question of what does it mean to be human is a 1,000, 2,000, 3,000-year-old question. It is what makes faith so appealing, right? This idea that there is an answer that is bigger than ourselves. It is what makes community so attractive. It's what makes loneliness so debilitating. And so if there's any one recommendation I can give to us as a collective, it's in our unique spheres of power, because everybody occupies a sphere of power and influence. In your sphere of power, in your sphere of influence, what are the questions that only you would ask? Who's missing in the room? How do we leverage resources, networks, expertise differently to ensure everyone is accounted for, everyone is seen, everyone is architecting the solutions of the future? I think those are the ones that we need to hold ourselves accountable for.
Thank you. I think I want to come back to this capital question. I think it's super important. Brendan, I want to come to you again. And I think what I found interesting in our conversation was that you were kind of challenging through the holding company the model of how we get to this future. We've been living in the last 20 years of what I would call startup thinking, product and services orientated thinking, but actually what I think the way you're unfurling value is, as you talked about, adjacent possibles. You're almost taking a vertically integrated line of sight on value as opposed to product-based value. So traditional VC portfolios, you distribute the risk in a domain. You're not doing that. You're going fashion, schools, pea protein, up and down the chain. You also talk about chain value frameworks. That's quite different from traditional venture capital portfolio management. That's different methods of raising asset classes are completely different. I just wondered, why do you think that's important from your perspective? And how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, I think the challenge, but also what we see as the opportunity, is that these fundamental crises we face globally, whether it's environmental, social, toxicity, pollution, they're deeply interrelated. And so we believe that the approach to that is really a diversified approach. It's one for us that takes shape as a holding company that invests in very foundational industries: food, fiber, health, clothing, shelter, things that actually are basic human needs that can be addressed if you do it in a more systematic way. So how do we do that? As an example, globally, about half of all the food that we grow is grown on synthetic nitrogen, on synthetic fertilizer. About half of that, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of it, leaks into our rivers, our lands. It actually is an enormous economic loss, but it's also an enormous environmental toll. Additionally, we're hitting peak phosphorus globally. It's kind of a nerdy point, but actually it's a crucial one because we can't grow food without phosphorus. So at Inside Out, we have a technology that we've invested in our scaling that takes waste, so human waste, animal waste, crop waste, and applies an electrolytic cell and turns that into nitrogen-rich fertilizer. It recycles the phosphorus. It actually unlocks almost 60% more biogas through its application. So there's a renewable energy component. The idea is that even within a certain vertical, we try to take a platform approach to scaling a technology. We do the same with education. We do the same with sustainable fashion. We focus on what's the whole value chain across the system, and how do we look for businesses that we think are leveraging this white space that exists, and we're putting a big bet on it. We've deployed about $70 million US dollars of our own capital into these types of companies. We believe that it's an unmet consumer demand, but it's also, we believe, a moral imperative. It doesn't have to. It can come from our faith. It can come from our values. It can come from how we see the next generation. Not just as a parent, but as someone who, who wants to plant the seed for the tree, for the tree whose shade I'll never sit in. It's this idea of what does it mean to cast a vision for that next generation, and we think that a systems approach is how you get there.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Alaa. When you look at that sort of vertically integrated theory of investment, I was talking to a children's fund, and I was like, my straightforward question was, where do you draw the boundary of your fund? Because you very quickly get, if you want to improve children's outcomes, you talk about air quality, sound quality, you talk about nutrition density, you talk about emotional well-being. You very quickly think that these fund structures that we've built, which are siloed fund structures, are no longer appropriate for a complex world. How are you thinking about fund structuring into this landscape?
I think it's an excellent question. I mean, to Brendan's point about being kind of a good ancestor and thinking about leaving solutions better than you found them, I would argue the funds that have existed, despite being siloed, have been very effective for the past 20 to 25 years as countries were really looking at kind of that hierarchy of needs. How do we get vaccinations? How do we get nutrition, et cetera? And I don't think the challenge is the volume of capital. We all hear about we need more money, we need more resources. I actually think it's very fragmented, to your point. And so I have 10 brothers and sisters. For anyone from a big family, you understand what collaboration actually means, which is that you don't have to agree on everything. You have to have kind of a shared future vision, and then everybody takes their piece of the puzzle. And I think that's what we need to get much better at. Where is it if I'm saying my fund will explicitly focus on education, education. Your fund might focus on climate resilience. Somebody else's might focus on health. How do we make sure that that actually ladders up to more than what we're putting in because we're working together, because we're looking at market failures across the supply chain, because we're saying, okay, if we do want to get to the point where we have consumers who can purchase sustainable fashion, we actually need to be able to create sustainable fashion in a way that is respectful and recognizes the integrity of the local communities. We need to be talking about, yes, education, but education actually we've seen isn't seen as a huge value from the community unless there's jobs that come out of that, right? Unless there is economic opportunity and employment. And so for me, it's less about saying you're doing it wrong, because I think people are quite married to the funds that exist and where they're putting their capital. And particularly if you're looking at philanthropies where they have their mission and their strategy and they say, listen, this is what we're focused on. But how do we bring them together and say, listen, you can continue to focus on your strategy. To your point, there's some white space there in the middle we're going to have to correct for, but we can actually make it part of a much bigger value chain. We can actually make this have 10 times more impact. We can actually leverage your dollar. For every dollar you're putting in, we're able to attract $6 or $7 to match. There's incredible matchmaking opportunities, I think. And in order to do that, I do think we need to be unapologetic about a future vision. We are going to leverage AI. We are going to say, okay, every single person should have access to education, basic health care. Everyone should have access to shelter, food and water security. Those should be fundamentals. If we can build with a vision where everybody's basic needs are met, then I think we get to the point where we can talk about, okay, how do we leverage it for more enriched futures, more enriched opportunity. But a North Star of dignity and opportunity for all, I think, would be really compelling in the funds landscape.
So we're coming to the last few minutes, and I think one of the things, maybe I'll do this in reverse order. Dr. Alaa, when I look at the world right now, I see a world which is going to become more volatile, and we're going to lose the baselines. And yes, people have always been vulnerable, but there's an acceleration. And the risk is the loss of social contract in many locations, in many places. How do we start to make the case for almost building that dignity when the world is becoming more degenerative, volatile? What do you think how do we start to make that case? And what's the scale of operation? Because the final point I want to make is this thesis of like, whether we're enterprise focused or infrastructure focused, and Brendan, this will link back into you. We were talking about how do you not do one school, how do you do a whole city schools in an investment thesis? And so I'm going to open it up. We've got 2 minutes.
Yeah,
so.
In the interest of time, I'll leave the impact versus scale answer to you, but I think they're equally important, and I think they are different things. You said an optimist. I think I'm a realist, but that actually means that I have a huge amount of faith in the world. I really do. I mean, I think that my grandmother was illiterate and widowed. My mother was married at 15 and had children, had 12 children. I am a product of capable, considerate, compassionate people and communities. I firmly believe that we are better off today than we were 25 years ago, and the data backs that up. We have cut child death in half. In 25 years. Polio is 99% eradicated. We are talking about greater gains for women and children around the world than any time in our history. We are talking about the global majority, which previously was excluded from most global policy conversations, actually having a tangible and legitimate seat at the table. And that includes countries like this one. And so I am incredibly optimistic about where the world can go. I think it's our opportunity to lose. I think we can fumble this bag very easily if we're not focused on how do we continue to create dignity, how do we continue to anchor our policy and our innovation in opportunity and in mutual respect and in compassion, if we lose the human elements of how we design this. But I think the data shows we can only go up, and I agree with you, volatility is always there. Volatility has never not been there. I am the product of dictatorships and conflicts, but I think even especially in volatility, you find people who are really looking at others and saying, I want to work with you, I want to do better, let's create a space where all of our kids can thrive. And I think if we just think about that North Star of being a good ancestor, I think we'll leave the world better than we found it.
Yeah, I think the foundational reason we're a holding company is because we believe that the ability to solve these challenges requires scale, and the only way to get that scale is from the capital markets. Philanthropy will never get us fully there. It's an integral part, but we need the capital markets to move. Here in the UAE, for instance, This country is the leader globally in issuing sukuk bonds, the green bonds, and that kind of idea of how do we use capital to scale those kinds of infrastructure challenges at the heart of how we focus on these issues. And we really take this approach of how do you integrate these types of diverse challenge sets into a single company where they can create tailwinds for each other. That's part of the beauty, I think, of having a holding company and approaching it from that mindset. I think it's something that we're casting a vision forward on, and I think it's one that that we invite partners to come along with us. I'd love to talk to those here in the audience who believe that environmental crises are not just the challenges of our day, but also our enormous business opportunities of our day, and that together it's something we can solve.